The first work in this concert is a new one and a fascinating one. It's called The Imagined Forest by the young composer Grace-Evangeline Mason. Now, I like this title and I like what she writes about it too. I haven't heard the music yet, but it all sounds like the kind of thing that I would find particularly interesting. Because Grace-Evangeline Mason is a great believer that music should take us on journeys, imaginative journeys, but that it shouldn't tell us what we should feel or think when we're there. In other words, it's for us to weave the stories. So she's taking us, as it were, to an imaginary forest, but how we find our way through the forest and what we discover when we're in there is left to us very much. She's inspired by the work of a Berlin artist, a German artist called Claire Celeste Bursch, who takes all sorts of collage, paper cut images of, particularly of forests and flora and fauna, and creates them into imaginary landscapes in which we can enter, well, almost like we're entering a world of dreams. And in a sense, that's what we all do when we listen to music. We are in a sort of half dream state, aren't we? And nobody should tell us what we should experience when we're dreaming. The music leads us by the hand, but it doesn't, as it were, tell us what we should see or feel or think. And I'm particularly struck by a remark made by a German philosopher in the 20th century, Ernst Bloch, who said, when we listen to music, what we really hear is ourselves. And then he comes up with another line, which I wonder if Grace-Evangeline Mason was thinking of. We walk in the forest and we feel we might be what the forest is dreaming. It's a beautiful line, isn't it? Well, that's what this piece is very much concerned with. Grace-Evangeline Mason has a terrific oral imagination. She's really good at creating colors and extraordinary textures, like you can imagine Claire Celeste Bursch cutting up her pictures and her images and creating her sounds. But it has the wonderful ability to suggest mental images to us. So what I suggest is don't try and analyze it as you go along. Don't try and make sense of it, but just let yourself go, as it were, and see what it suggests to you. Because if that's what's happening, then that's very much, I think, what Grace-Evangeline Mason wants you to do. After that, as a kind of foretaste of the big Rachmaninov work we have in the second part of the concert, is a tiny little piece called Vocalise. Actually, it was part of a collection of songs that Rachmaninoff wrote in 1915, but is it a song? Because in a way, what he's doing is treating the voice like a kind of musical instrument. There are no words, it's just a ah is all it is, hence Vocalise. And yet, in a way, it is a beautiful preparation for the symphony, because so often in Rachmaninoff's works, you have these outpourings of what I can only describe as instrumental song. The clarinet solo in the slow movement of the symphony is a terrific example. Well, here is the other equivalent, a voice coming close to the sound of a musical instrument. And it's absolutely gorgeous. It has that quality, that amazing quality of just one, of a very long melody emerging in one huge breath. Well, obviously the singer needs to take more than one huge breath to get through it. But the real trick is to make you notice the breath as little as possible during the performance. I once heard this performed on a recording by a theremin. You know, that electronic instrument that the comedian Bill Bailey has reintroduced into our lives, where you move your hands and create these wonderful woo, woo, woo noises. It worked brilliantly well, and for at least a minute I couldn't tell whether I was listening to a voice or some sort of computer simulation of a voice. It's on the border between the world of almost human singing of instruments and the world of almost instrumental playing of the human voice. It's the kind of quality you sometimes feel in jazz when you hear a great, great instrumental solo and you think, oh, this could also be almost be a human voice. It's on that fascinating cusp. And for that reason, I find it particularly moving. It doesn't need words. It's the soul, as it were, just pouring itself out directly before us. No wonder it's become one of Rachmaninoff's most popular short pieces. Now, after this is a piece you may not have heard of, and don't give yourself a hard time if you haven't, because Paul Dukas, an early 20th century French composer, actually wrote very, very little. He was a great perfectionist. There was an awful lot of music that he destroyed and never left onto the stage. But he did allow us to hear his ballet La Péri, and we have two movements from that. Fanfare and the poem dansé, a kind of little digest of the ballet in this concert tonight. It's an extraordinary piece. A Peri, I should tell you, is a beautiful magical spirit in Persian and Middle Eastern mythology. And in this ballet, she encounters Alexander the Great, who has spread his empire throughout the known world. And again, he finds that when he's conquered the known world, he suddenly becomes very depressed because there's nothing left to do. So he sets himself a challenge. How can he achieve immortality? The Peri appears to want to help him, but really the answer is that he learns in time is to forget it, that striving for more immortality is vain, and he should be content with what he has and indeed what he is. That's the message of the music, but we don't even need to know that just to enjoy this extremely beautiful music, which in some ways is full of the kind of the afterglow of very late 19th century Romanticism, and in others is kind of crisscrossed with elements from the French so-called Impressionists, from Debussy and Ravel. So a lot of color, a lot of atmosphere, a lot of delicate suggestion, and also some rather wonderful, powerful, splendid moments, like the brass fanfare at the beginning, which has a tremendous sort of radiant, brazen quality to it. But the work I imagine most of you are looking forward to most in this concert tonight is Sergei Rachmaninoff's wonderful Second Symphony. Now, I've been to Russia a few times and talked to Russians, and it's often struck me when I go there. Well, one thing you can't help noticing is that Russian composers like Tchaikovsky, like Borodin, like Rachmaninoff, even like Prokofiev and Shostakovich, they love melodies. They love very, very long melodies. Melodies that take a huge deep breath and then seem to sort of pour out in phrases that last whole minutes. It kind of fits with the nature of that extraordinary country, because particularly if you come from a little island like Britain, going to Russia, you are immediately aware of just how much space there is. Even in a city like Petersburg, Palace Square is so huge, it creates a kind of sense of vertigo. And I once took the train from Petersburg to Moscow. It took 8 hours. I staggered off at the end and said to my friend, well, you do get an idea of how big this country is. He said, no, you don't. We've only come a very little way. It's 2.5 days to Siberia. And in every Russian composer, it seems to me, even when they're city composers, there's a real sense of that enormousness, of that great, huge space. And this symphony, well, it lasts nearly an hour, even if you don't observe the big repeat in the first movement, which most people don't. And as I said, it's full of tune after tune, but each of these tunes, you can almost feel Rachmaninoff stopping and going, right, deep breath, let's have another wonderful melody. Nowhere more so, I think, than the great clarinet solo that begins the slow third movement, which is just one of those gifts from God, it seems to me. It's so beautiful. Rachmaninoff, he's a fascinating figure. I love him. Years and years ago, I was talking to a Russian friend of mine, and I said, why is it that so much music in Russia is in the minor key, not the major? Here's a minor chord. And here's a major chord. You see, that sounds quite bright, doesn't it? But when you change it to that, it's a little bit darker, isn't it? And when you put nice deep sounds, of which Rachmaninoff is so fond, immediately a sense of darkness, of somberness, but it's not heavy. It's not depressing. This is the thing. Rachmaninoff absolutely loves minor keys, absolutely loves minor keys, but it's a real love. I remember when I asked my friend about this, I said, why is so much Russian music, not just symphonies, concertos, operas, but pop songs, military marches, folk music, why is it also minor key? I remember what he said, this is because we reserve the major key for inexpressible sorrow. And it just is, the Russians have an ability, it seems to me, to enjoy sadness, enjoy melancholy, to almost rest back and accept the fact, fatalistically, that life is just like that. It's going to be full of sadness. To pursue happiness is ludicrous. It will come to you, but it's a bit more like a kind of a cat. happiness. You know, the more you try and get it to sit on your lap, the more it doesn't, and it'll come when you least expect it. And Rachmaninoff, well, there are radiant, happy moments in his music. There certainly are towards the end of this symphony, but we go through some wonderful, dark, somber, melancholy, moody stuff first. And it's like a kind of warm bath, the gorgeous scoring, the wonderful tunes. I think Rachmaninoff can really teach us to not expect life to be a bed of roses all the time, but that you can even enjoy it, even when it's not. And doesn't have to be a message, though, in the end. This is just a glorious piece of music, an incredible soundscape that may well set you thinking in terms of vast Russian landscapes with huge forests and lakes. Rachmaninoff certainly did associate you with that in his own mind. Most of his later life, he was to spend in exile, and like many Russian exiles, he found it particularly painful. The memory of Mother Russia, it was so strong. Yet there's almost a kind of nostalgia even here when he was still resident in Russia before the Russian Revolution. It's that kind of thing that makes it so moving and so at the same time, well, but so thoroughly enjoyable. I must say I love this piece, and love it most of all sometimes when it's its darkest. It's gorgeous darkness.